Hey everyone, Israel is currently in a war against the terror organization Hamas, and we know how hard it can be to keep up with all the news. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of the latest developments out of Israel, we're here for you. I'm Lajar Gavelazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review. Day 103 of the war in Gaza, and the IDF is pressing forward toward Hamas leadership believed hiding in and under the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis. At the same time, new information is emerging on the extent of the vast terrorist tunnel network. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
The warfare in much of Gaza is winding down, but not so in and around and under the terrorist stronghold in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. Fighters in the 7th Brigade Combat Team directed a number of aircraft to eliminate terrorists identified in the area. The IDF is facing the challenge of battling Hamas while avoiding casualties to Gazan civilians. The IDF dropped thousands of leaflets calling on residents to leave the Khan Yunis area for their own safety. This man said he will not leave and warned of more terror against Israel.
فيش ورق عنا جملتهم حالهم قد ما يرموا مش هيخوفونا احنا شعب فلسطين جبارين اللي عملناه فيهم مو هو قليل لسه اللي جاي أسوأ من اللي راح ينحرقوا كله.
Much of the work on the ground is fixed on locating, searching, and then destroying what remains of the vast terrorist tunnel network under Gaza. Much of the network has been destroyed in northern and central Gaza, but much is left to be done in the south. Senior Israeli defense officials now assess that Hamas's Gaza tunnel network is between 350 and 450 miles long, far longer than previously believed. There are roughly 5,700 separate shafts leading down to the tunnels. Israeli intelligence officials are quoted in the New York Times saying there are about 100 miles of tunnels under Khan Yunis in southern Gaza alone, where IDF troops are engaged in intensive fighting as they search for Hamas's leader, Yahya Sinwar, and other terror commanders believed to be hiding underground. The White House expressed support for the IDF shift to low-intensity fighting, as announced yesterday by Defense Minister Gallant. Washington says this will allow for an increase of humanitarian aid, as well as the return of civilians to their homes.
In breaking news, a 70-year-old woman was killed and at least 20 people have been injured in Ra'anana due to a combination of car rammings and stabbings. Emergency services are responding to 3 to 4 different scenes in the city. The terrorist, a resident of Hebron, was arrested. It was reported that the terrorist ran them over with a stolen vehicle. MARA Director Eli Bin emphasized that the situation is ongoing, with indications that all injuries may have resulted from being struck by the vehicle. Among the casualties is a 66-year-old man with moderate injuries and 2 pedestrians lightly run over. And this is a developing story. Hamas claimed responsibility for the combined ramming and stabbing attacks in Ra'anana yesterday afternoon, murdering 1 woman and wounding over a dozen people. A terrorist stabbed a woman while another terrorist stole a car and proceeded to carry out ramming attacks in several locations in the city. The terrorists swapped vehicles 3 times after crashing. The terrorists were Mohammed Zaidat, 44, and Ahmed Zaidat, 24, both from Hebron, and were later arrested. And joining us now is International Police spokesperson Master Sergeant Dean Elsdan. The attack in Ra'anana, Dean, was the first big attack inside Israel since the start of the war in Gaza. How, if at all, can we protect ourselves, or is it even possible?
So it's a great question. It's the first big attack since the war, but it's not the first attack that was attempted. The police and the border police are working around the clock, night and day. They're working overt and covert. We have so many special units and so many units that deal with technology and intelligence who are thwarting attacks. I can just give an example. Just a few days ago, the border police in Jerusalem stopped 2 members of ISIS who had affiliation to the ISIS terror organization inside of Jerusalem, just a few miles away from the old city. They found books where they had instructions on how to create bombs and do things of the sort. We were able to stop them, preventing a much larger attack from happening. This is just a drop in the bucket. This is what the police and the border police are doing around the clock. We're working with the Shin Bet, with the IDF. Everybody has the same goal right now. It's not a secret that we're in a state of war. But what I can tell you is that together with the civilians, we increase our vigilance, we pay attention to anything suspicious, and we alert the police. We're going to be able to protect ourselves a lot better if we act responsibly.
Dean, the two terror suspects entered Israel by car from Hebron. Did they not have working papers to be in Israel? I mean, how many Palestinians from the territories are in Israel at any given time, and why isn't their entry during this war prevented? I mean, how come?
So I don't want to get into the details, neither of the politics of if they're allowing people or not allowing people. There are people who are allowed to be in Israel with work permits. The suspects that we're talking about, though, were in Israel illegally. And this is something that the police, together with the Shin Bet, are going to figure out how they got here so that we can stop it from taking place in the future, but also to make sure that we arrest anybody that was involved in bringing them inside of Israel. We're going to do everything possible to keep our people safe. If that includes making sure that anyone who assisted them, knowingly or not knowingly, is going to be brought in for questioning.
Dean, it does not appear that this was an attack coordinated by Hamas. Rather, it was individuals deciding to kill Jews for the cause. Is there also a growing possibility that armed attacks will be attempted next?
Listen, this is Israel, and unfortunately, we've seen no shortage of armed attacks against civilians or security forces. But that's why we're putting out more police officers and more border police officers in the streets to make sure that we have a heavy presence, which thwarts anybody from trying to commit an attack. And in the event that attack does take place, we're going to be right there. You saw the attack in Ra'anana. The police were able to close in on the net and make sure that we capture both the terrorists that were involved in the attack. Hamas is praising these types of attacks, and that just goes to speak to what kind of organization we're dealing with. We're dealing with people who want nothing more than to harm civilians. And us, as the police and the border police, want nothing more than to protect them. Because these are our families. I might be wearing this uniform and the officers might wear a uniform, but at the end of the day, we're defending our home. We're defending our loved ones. And we're going to stop at nothing to make sure that we make sure that they're safe.
That's a really strong message. Dean, right before the interview started, you told me you're in Kfar Aza right now. What does it look like
Correct.
now? What's your main activity there?
So right now, we're bringing a lot of delegations here to see the aftermath of October 7th. What a lot of people might not know is that the first responders here to Kfar Aza were actually police and border police forces. Units of 33, a special unit of the police, Yamas, a special unit of counterterrorism in the border police. They were here making sure that we can get civilians to safety. We were battling the terrorists. So we're bringing delegations here to show, one, what Hamas is all about. Show them the atrocities that they committed, but two, show them why it took so long for security forces to get to certain people. People were inside of their safe rooms, a room that's supposed to protect them from rockets, and on October 7th was used to protect them against terrorists. And our security forces had to go house by house, some of them that were booby-trapped, in order to pull them to safety, but also to take out any of the terrorists that were swarming into residential communities along the Gaza border, which is right behind me a few kilometers away.
In 3 months, and I can only imagine how hard it is. Thank you so much for joining us today, and stay safe.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple. And the UN monitoring organization UN Watch last week revealed more than 3,000 UNRWA staff and teachers were celebrating the October 7th massacre against Israel. What has been the UN's response to this revelation, and what exactly is UNRWA's role in October 7th? Joining us now to discuss is the Executive Director of UN Watch, Hillel Neuer. Hillel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So UN Watch first broke the revelation last week of the 3,000 UNRWA employees who celebrated the October 7th massacre. What is the response that you've received from the United Nations over this report?
Well, we've had a mixed, I would say, contradictory response. Initially, they said they were concerned. This is the spokesman of the UN Secretary General in New York, said that they were concerned about it. They would look into it. A follow-up question was asked a few days later, and he said, well, UN Watch, they have a kind of a track record in which he was basically disparaging us. And then he said, but we will look into it. Well, is the UN looking into it? I don't know. And I'll just mention UNRWA. Their spokesman, Adnan Abu Hasna, was interviewed by Raviv Drucker on Channel 13, and he said, we don't know. We don't know if the members of this Telegram group work for UNRWA. They don't work for UNRWA. And he said, how can we find out? He said, we want to investigate, but how can we find out? All these things are happening in Gaza, and there's no way for us to find out. Well, guess what? You don't need to be in Gaza. The Telegram group is online. Very quickly, within an hour or two, we were able to identify individuals, who they were, their UNRWA contract ID numbers, numerous details of the people posting, including the fact that several of them, of the admins of the group, the leaders of this Telegram group, work for UNRWA. They are people who, on the Telegram group, share internal UNRWA information. It's a group of teachers who are sort of temporary. They maybe work from month to month. They don't yet have fixed-term contracts, but they undergo UNRWA training. They have UNRWA contracts. And on the Telegram group, there's sharing of all kinds of internal relevant UNRWA teacher information. And then they're celebrating October 7th, saying that we need to have the same education that these Hamas individuals have. For them, they were heroes. The same kind of education that they had, we need to replicate. This is really shocking.
And now, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres did issue a strongly worded statement condemning the October 7th attacks. The timing, though, very strange. Nearly 102 days after the fact, he's remained mostly silent on Hamas's crimes. Do you think his statement now has to do with what UN Watch has revealed?
Look, there's no way for us to conclusively attribute the motives for his statement, but the timing was noticed. Several people on social media noticed that we had called out the Secretary General for his failure to act. Indeed, they're disparaging of our report, which is, no one has challenged any of the evidence. There's a Telegram group. We've submitted, 2 days ago, started to publish a Twitter thread with thousands of UNRWA names that appeared on this group that were shared by them with contract ID numbers from UNRWA. No one has challenged any of this, these details, this information. And so perhaps the Secretary General was feeling defensive. Perhaps that was a motivation for them to do this. But, when they, I would say, insulted us and questioned the credibility of the report, we put out an enormous amount of information, details of UNRWA teachers posting celebrations of terrorism. Look, just yesterday, the British Home Secretary, James Cleverly, declared that Hizbut Tahrir is a terrorist group, and he said in part because they celebrated the October 7th attacks. Therefore, they are promoting and encouraging terrorism under British law. Under British law, we asked if thousands of UNRWA teachers are systematically celebrating the October 7th attacks, saying that we want our youth to be, quote unquote, breastfed the jihad, and cheering the attacks, sharing photos and videos from the Hamas attackers on October 7th, is not UNRWA also becoming a group that is promoting and encouraging terrorism, and therefore could UNRWA under British law be declared a terrorist group?
An important question. Hillel, thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And on security development, an IDF soldier was wounded late Monday in a firefight with apparent drug smugglers along the Egyptian border, and the Houthis have renewed attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. And ILTV Steve Leibovich has more.
The challenges to Israeli security have been many since the start of the war with Gaza. The quietest border had been that of Israel and Egypt, running between the Negev and the Sinai. That quiet was broken when some 20 smugglers, some armed, arrived at the Nitzana area in an apparent attempt to smuggle narcotics into Israel. Troops engaged in a gun battle with the suspects, hitting several of them. One of the soldiers was reportedly hurt during the exchange of fire and was taken to hospital. She is reported in good condition. After the shootout, Egyptian media reported that 6 smugglers were arrested on the Egyptian side of the border. The Nitzana crossing is over 40 kilometers from Gaza. Goods are inspected at Nitzana before being allowed to enter the strip. Meanwhile, the Houthi rebels have renewed attacks on commercial shipping, firing a missile at a U.S.-owned ship just off the coast of Yemen in the Gulf of Aden. They also launched an anti-ship cruise missile toward an American destroyer in the Red Sea. The attack on the Gibraltar Eagle further escalates tension gripping the Red Sea after American-led strikes on the rebels. The ship reported no injuries or significant damage and continued on its journey.